Welcome to Peace in Math. In this video, we're going to cover how to solve a quadratic equation by square rooting both sides. Now, you can always use the quadratic formula to solve any quadratic equation, but sometimes the problem might be set up in a way to make it easier to solve by square roots. Here's when to use this method. When you have an x squared term but no x, like this one on the left, or when you have a parentheses squared like this part highlighted in pink. Now, how you're going to solve these types of equations is by using the order of operations backwards, and make sure you don't forget the plus or minus when square rooting both sides. Let's take a look at this example. Here we have an x squared term, but no x to the first power, so we're going to solve this using square roots, using order of operations backwards. How we're going to solve this is the same way as if we would solve this, where it was just x to the first power instead of x squared. We would undo any adding, subtracting, then undo any multiplication, division. We're going to do the same steps first. Alright, so if I undo the adding and subtracting first, I'm going to get rid of this subtraction of 9 by adding 9 to both sides. That way these add up to 0. And if I bring down what's left over, that gives me 5x squared, and then on this side, 31 plus 9 gives me 40. Now my next step is to undo any multiplication or division. The x squared is being multiplied by 5, so I'm going to divide both sides by 5. These divide out to 1, so I'm just left with 1x squared, or just x squared, and 40 divided by 5 gives me 8. Next step, I want to cancel out this exponent, so I want to cancel out this square. So I'm going to square root both sides. So square and square root are opposites, that means this square will cancel out the square root. So that leaves me with x to the first power, or just x. And as soon as you square root both sides of an equation, don't forget to put down your plus or minus. This will ensure that you account for both possible solutions that would give you this x squared. So for right now, I'm just going to leave this as plus or minus rad 8, which we'll need to simplify. To simplify this square root of 8, there's a couple different ways. You can do the factor tree method, so I can split this up as 2 times 4. 2 is prime, so I'm circling it. And then the 4 I can split up as 2 times 2, and both of those are prime. And if it's square root, that means I'm looking for pairs of numbers. Here's a pair of 2s, so that means I'm going to have a 2 outside the radical. And this other 2 is left over, nothing to pair up with that one, so it's going to remain under the square root. So it simplifies to 2 rad 2. Another way to simplify this 2, I can split this up as square root of 4, so looking for perfect square factors that go into 8. 4 is a perfect square, so I'm using that one because this can simplify to 2, and this can't be reduced at all, so that's going to stay rad 2. So here's 2 different ways to get to this answer, 2 rad 2. So going back to the original equation, my final answer for x, plus or minus 2 square root of 2. Which sometimes you might see this written out separately, like one with the positive and then comma, one with the negative. But most of the time we'll just leave this as plus or minus. If you need help simplifying square roots like this, check out my video on simplifying square roots and radicals. That'll give you some extra examples to practice with those. Let's take a look at this example where we have this parentheses squared. Okay. So I'm going to undo the adding and subtracting first again. So I'm trying to get this squared part by itself. So getting rid of everything on the outside, I'm going to cancel out that addition of 5. So I'm subtracting 5 from both sides and then bringing down what's left over. I have 2 times x plus 5 parentheses squared, and then subtracting these I get 162. Now I want to cancel out this 2 out front, so I'm trying to undo the multiplication and division. Now make sure you do not distribute this 2 into the parentheses, because this parentheses is being squared, it has an exponent, so you cannot distribute the 2 unless you were to deal with this first. So since we're going backwards, if I'm trying to get this squared part by itself, it's being multiplied by 2, so just do the opposite. We're going to divide both sides by 2. That way these cancel out, and then bringing down what's left over, I have just the parentheses squared. So squared part is by itself now, and dividing these I get 81. Okay, my next step, I want to cancel out this exponent. So I want to cancel out the square, that means I'm going to square root both sides. Square and square root cancel. So I'm just left with this x plus 5, and since there's nothing left outside of these parentheses, we can drop those. And I'm square rooting both sides, so don't forget plus or minus, and square root of 81 gives us 9. Now here's why we're putting this plus or minus. If I have positive 9 squared, that gives me 81, and if I have negative 9 squared, this also gives me positive 81. So that's why we have plus or minus, 2 different solutions. Okay, now my final step is I can deal with what was inside those parentheses, this x plus 5. Now I can deal with that. So in my last step, I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides to get x by itself. So now I have just x equals, and for now I'm just going to write this as plus or minus 9 and then minus 5, because we're going to get 2 completely different answers. So my first answer, if I have the positive 9 and then subtract 5, and then my second answer is if I use negative 9 and subtract 5. Okay, so I'm going to get 2 different solutions. So positive 9 minus 5 gives me 4, and then negative 9 minus 5 gives me negative 14. So my final answers for x equals are positive 4 and negative 14. Here's one more where we have parentheses squared. So I'm going to go backwards with the order of operations, saving what's inside the parentheses. That's going to be my last step. So I'm going to get rid of everything on the outside. So outside this parentheses squared, there's nothing to add or subtract, so that one's already done. So I'm going to go straight to canceling out any multiplication or division. This squared part is being multiplied by 3, so then we're going to divide both sides by 3. That way these cancel out since they divide out to 1. Bring down what's left over. I have x minus 8 squared, and then dividing these I get negative 25. Now my next step, I want to cancel out the exponent. So to cancel out the square, we're going to square root both sides. Square and square root cancel. So I'm just left with x minus 8, dropping the parentheses since nothing's outside them anymore, and square root of negative 25, don't forget plus or minus, and square root of negative 25, this gives me 5i. So remember, since the square root is negative, that's going to give me an imaginary answer. Check out my video on simplifying negative radicals if you need a little extra help with that. Okay, my last step, I want to deal with what was inside those parentheses. So inside the parentheses there was this x minus 8, so that means I'm going to add 8 to both sides. So now I have my x is completely by itself, so I have x equals, and I'm just going to leave this as plus or minus 5i, and then plus 8. Now in the last example, we combined the like terms to get two completely different answers, but here, these are not like terms, so you cannot combine them. This has an I and that doesn't, so we're going to leave them separate. But how you write this, to put them in standard form for a complex number is a plus bi. So we're going to put the imaginary part last. So I'm just going to switch these around. I'm going to put the positive 8 first, and then my plus or minus 5i. And here's your two solutions, which you might see this written out separately as 8 plus 5i, and then comma 8 minus 5i. But normally we'll leave them with the plus or minus. Alright, here are some practice problems for you to try. Take a second, pause the video, and work these out on a scrap piece of paper, and then you can check your answers at the end. Good luck! Here's a list of the answers to each of the practice problems. If you need help simplifying radicals or dealing with radicals and square roots, check out my videos for each of those topics. Thanks for watching, and hopefully this helped you find a little more peace in math. Till next time.